Psychology is the science of the human mind. In this unit, we will explore how we perceive the world and integrate information from our senses. You will gain an understanding of the biological basis of human behaviour, of how we can perform complex sequences of action and respond to the world around us. You will ask questions about human nature, such as why do we help each other? And how can we commit heinous acts of genocide and torture against one another? Together, we will take a journey through the human lifespan about how we develop and age, why we feel emotions, and what shapes us to make us who we are. We will delve into the fascinating history of psychology.
Hi, and welcome to week 1 of Investigating Psychology A. This week we're going to be discussing the applications of psychology and also how we use the scientific approach. So psychology has fought long and hard over the years to be recognised as a rigorous scientific discipline. And in order to do this, one of the ways that we go about asking questions about why people behave in a certain way or think and feel in particular ways, we use the scientific approach. And so with this, we construct a particular question called a hypothesis that might explain why certain things are related in a particular way. And then we go out and conduct research. And so the research that we conduct involves the rigorous construction of a study design, carefully chosen methodologies, and the way that we're going to collect our data. Once this is done and we survey our participants, we collect the data, analyse it, and then we draw conclusions based on the observations from that data. So the conclusions that we draw aren't just based on observations or how we might feel at the time. They're grounded in scientific theory. And so to give you an example of how this might be done well or done poorly, I wanted to highlight an earlier study that was done in 1975 in Taiwan by a researcher named Li. Li was interested in the things that caused people to buy and use contraceptives. And so Li went out and surveyed a very large group of people and found that there was a connection between the number of electrical goods that people owned and their use of contraceptives. And that relationship was that if you owned lots and lots of electrical devices like fans and fridges and kettles and toasters and so on, you were also more likely to use contraceptives. So does this mean that owning a kettle causes people to use a condom? You might think that's not a valid conclusion at all. In fact, it's completely absurd for me to suggest that in the first place. In clear-cut examples such as this, we might be able to recognise that there's an association between two things or two variables without there actually being some kind of causation at all. And so that's probably the take-home point from this lesson, is that in psychology and in all disciplines that is based in science, correlation does not equal causation. And so to talk a little bit more today about using the scientific approach in psychology, earlier I spoke with a registered psychologist who's currently working in an aged care facility. Hi Johannes, so thanks for joining us today at Investigating Psychology A.
No worries.
So sometimes it seems as though some people don't have a great understanding about how psychology is applied on a day-to-day basis and in the real world. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what it's like to be a psychologist, and maybe you could give us an insight into how using the scientific approach is a core and a key part of the way that you go about chatting with people on a day-to-day basis.
So my role as a psychologist is basically to work with people on a day-to-day basis to try and improve their well-being. So typically dealing with issues that come up for people in their general lives from day to day, things like depression, anxiety, stress management, grief and loss, and working with those issues and trying to help people move through those times.
So can you tell us a little bit about how your undergraduate studies and background in psychology helps you and has influenced the way that you go about and do things now as an actual practicing psychologist?
Well, I think a large part of being a psychologist comes without any practice or knowledge or study in any way. I think it's part of being a human in that you're able to interact with people on a one-to-one basis and understand and empathise with them and communicate effectively with them and understand how they're feeling. But a large part of what we do as psychologists is based in evidence-based practice, so not just being able to empathise and understand how people are feeling, but also having a sound knowledge of psychological theories and research so that you're able to effectively help them.
And how do you take a scientific approach and incorporate clinical reasoning and evidence-based practice into the way that you see clients on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, so I think there's a couple of different ways that evidence-based practice is incorporated into clinical psychological practice. The first, I think, is, as I mentioned, having a sound understanding of research so that you can evaluate studies in a way that is useful for practice. So, doing research about therapeutic approaches that are effective and useful for particular clients, and incorporating that into your practice, and I suppose being adaptable in your approach. And I think the second and probably the most important aspect is the way that you interact with clients. So we're not just going in there with a hypothesis about why someone is feeling a certain way or behaving in a certain way. You're constantly testing hypotheses with that individual, talking to them about what they think, what they feel, and also getting second-hand opinions from their friends, their relatives, the people that care about them. So gathering evidence from both the client and the people that know them, as well as your own clinical observations, and incorporating that into your hypothesis testing, and I suppose in a way being a researcher or a bit of a detective in that way.
Thanks for coming to join us today, Johannes.
No worries.
So in summary, as a psychologist, it doesn't matter what type you are, whether it's a practicing psychologist like Johannes, a researcher like myself, or a forensic psychologist, or an organisational psychologist, or somebody working in human resources. All of us use the scientific method and the scientific approach in order to understand behaviour. And this incorporates aspects such as clinical reasoning and evidence-based practice.